In our series, A String of Pearls, DutchbuzZ contributors speak to people who have made an exceptional contribution to our local community. People whose passion for what they do have had an added value for the city of The Hague.
The Hague entrepreneur and voiceover artist Roger Thurman has lived in the city of peace and justice long enough to be fully integrated and to have moved on from being an expat to a retiree. Roger offered his voice for use on DutchbuzZ jingles more than a decade ago, and we've taken great pleasure in hearing his baritone voice during our broadcasts. Today he is our guest on DutchbuzZ, and we have made him one of our pearls for his services to DutchbuzZ and our international community. Roger, you've lived in The Hague for more than 40 years now. How has the role of what we call expats changed in that time? And how has The Hague itself evolved in your experience of the city?
Well, how has the role of the expat changed? Not in many ways, except I think probably in far greater numbers of services and support activities by which the city is more attuned to the needs and aspirations and so forth of folks other than the Dutch. It is a great place to be, filthy weather of course, but that's an English export, we can't do anything about that. And there are a number of sort of organizations serving the needs of expats, and of course English is the major lingua franca of not only the expats but of course many of the Dutch as well. No, it's a beautiful city to live in, lots and lots of green space. Fabulous musea, and a great sort of, yet at the same time, of course, it's a nice, quiet little backwater in some ways. No, lots of nice things to say about The Hague.
How has it evolved over the last 40 years?
Well, probably as a result of that famous peace conference in 1899, when, I forget which queen it was, it might have been Wilhelmina, offered the world the location for the first international peace conference. The world was trying to find a place where they could actually talk primarily about the rules of war. But of course nobody could really accept London, the French wouldn't agree to, Paris, the British wouldn't agree to, and it was the whole darned world. And so little Netherlands, no aspirations for sort of bullying or overdoing their role, said, why don't you come to The Hague? And so it became the location for the world's first peace conference. Now, since then, it has gone on to host, I think probably now hundreds of organizations which are associated with international peace and jurisprudence between nation states. It's quite impressive. There are a lot of lawyers, international lawyers especially, in The Hague.
Do you feel it's lived up to its role as the city of peace and justice?
Well, it's doing its best. Peace and justice are things which are hard to find in today's world. It's constantly a challenge to keep neighbors from kicking each other's, supports out from their seats. And so the role of The Hague in offering a center of discussion and negotiation has become a lot more important. Whether it has always been a success, of course, is another question. There's an awful lot of argument in international politics, and The Hague, of course, is not in a position to solve those contretemps. But on a par, or rather, looking at its contribution as a contributor to world peace, I think it's done very well.
Now, we spoke earlier about the role of the expat. You said not much change, but I do think that COVID, the pandemic, has been quite a big blow. Their numbers apparently have shrunk here in The Hague. Is this breed going extinct?
Well, the breed of the international visitor to The Hague? Oh, no, not at all. The Hague will benefit enormously from Brexit, of course. Expats like the relative simplicity of living in The Hague. It's got the sea close by. And so all nature lovers have what they want. It's very easy. One of the great things about The Hague, actually the Netherlands as a whole, is it's easy to get out of. You jump in the car and 2 or 3 hours you're in different language domains, 4 hours to Paris and so on and so on. It's very convenient from that point of view. The social scene between expats and the Dutch is also very rich. There are French clubs, German clubs, English clubs. There are schools serving all of the different age groups of children from different cultures. And broadly speaking, it is a very, very international city.
It's often in the top 3 best places in the world to bring up children. I know you have 2. Has that been the case for you too?
Well, we had a lot of thinking, Mama and I, about where we should educate the kids. And it was quite unanimous. The Dutch have an excellent primary, secondary, and tertiary education system. The standards are high. The social interaction is much less, or rather, the social layering is much less than in places like the UK and the US. And of course, kids get this great opportunity of learning relatively easily learning foreign languages. So they're sort of already international by the time they're sort of 9 or 10 years old.
Now you transitioned from being an expat a long time ago to being quasi-Hagenaar. What were the benefits of learning Dutch and integrating?
Oh, a world of frustration for the first 5 years. The key was, of course, you had to be willing to make a fool of yourself in public. I won't go into the details, but everybody who's confronted with learning Dutch knows the embarrassing moments and the need for courage and be willing to look a fool. And so that's really the great stepping stone. Women, of course, handle learning languages much easier than men. Well, brain structure and brain structure primarily, I think. So yes, I would say that choosing between educating your children in a monolingual environment such as the UK or the US and The Hague, or indeed Paris or Munich or Bern, it's an obvious, it's as some people call it, a no-brainer. You learn so much more. The brain benefits from the extra development of that linguistic corner of the brain. So I would say that the advantages are extremely broad, and the Dutch have succeeded in having their children be happier, according to many opinion polls, than many other countries of the world, in fact possibly most.
Now, I know one of your pet hates, if I can call it that, are these screens that children, adolescents, even the parents are like permanently transfixed by. What's happened to the spoken and the written word?
The written word versus the spoken word, yeah. The world is now, sadly, disastrously, I think, giving up reading. Young people, I think, in the United States are in some sectors now no longer obliged to learn to write. Their handwriting is actually disappearing. So it's in a sense we are victims of that great one-eyed monster, the television screen, and we have given up reading the works of great authors, which to me is an absolute tragedy. I don't know whether can I quote Mr. Dahl for you? Well, Mr. Dahl, Roald Dahl to us, God rest his soul, was a wonderful poet, a great storyteller, and a bit of a naughty fellow from time to time, I understand. But anyway, he wrote a marvelous poem called Television, which was a diatribe against electronics and a support for the written word. I don't know whether you want to hear it.
Yes, do share it with us, Roger.
Well, it's called Television.
And may I point out to our listeners that you're reading this off the screen?
Yes, I didn't remember this. Anyway, Television by Roald Dahl. The most important thing we've learned, so far as children are concerned, is never, never, never let them near your television set. Or better still, just don't install the idiotic thing at all. In almost every house we've been, we've watched them gaping at the screen. They loll and slop and lounge about and stare until their eyes pop out. Last week in someone's place we saw a dozen eyeballs on the floor. They sit and stare and sit until they're hypnotized by it. Until they're absolutely drunk with all that shocking, ghastly junk. Oh yes, we know it keeps them still. They don't climb out the windowsill. They never fight or kick or punch. They leave you free to cook the lunch and wash the dishes in the sink. But did you ever stop to think that, to wonder just exactly what this does to your beloved tot? It rots the sense in the head. It kills imagination dead. It clogs and clutters up the mind. It makes a child so dull and blind. He can no longer understand a fantasy, a fairyland. His brain becomes as soft as cheese. His powers of thinking rust and freeze. He cannot think, he only sees. All right, you cry, all right, you'll say, but if we take the set away, what shall we do to entertain our darling children? Please explain. We'll answer you this by asking you. What used the darling ones to do? How used they keep themselves contented? Before this monster was invented, have you forgotten? Don't you know? We'll say it very loud and slow. They used to read. They read and read and read and read, and then proceed to read some more. Great Scott, gadzooks, one half their lives was reading books.
Roger, delightful. And I think it's very obvious to our listeners why DutchbuzZ asked you many years ago to do our jingles for us because of your beautiful baritone voice. How did you roll into voiceovers?
Well, I was invited by an agent to come along and do some tests. And that all worked out. I went into the studio and learned a little bit about microphone technique, the do's and don'ts, which is actually a lot more than you would imagine. It's quite tough to get words from paper onto the old tape, as we would have called it. But you learn the trade, and voices, of course, we hear all around us. They are such common material that we put them up as, in a sense, our wallpaper. But of course, some voices stick like glue and are instantly known, particularly, of course, those folk who are film stars and famous politicians and so on and so on. So the great skill in reading for the mic recording for the mic is reading. And there are an awful lot of people with beautiful voices, but who cannot read clearly. They don't time it right. They have some sort of drawback. And it's really quite fascinating how you do need, for a voice either on television or radio, or indeed in the commercial world with advertising and so on, you need a voice which can take the intended message from paper normally, although nowadays it's a screen, and put it into sound. And that is still an art which quite a few people do not possess. But we've got them, all over the Dutch radio system and internationally and so on. One of the things, curiously, is it's the speed of reading is not the factor which determines how understandable a text is. It's the gaps, the tiny little gaps between words, which allows the listener to separate out the word within a sentence. And of course, there are all sorts of special computer programs which can clean up spoken texts. And there you have it. You know, we are surrounded by the spoken word and completely take it for granted. But it's a fascinating world to be actually in it and be part of the production operation. So, together, of course, with the extraordinary guys behind this in the sound studios.
Well, we've been delighted to have heard your voice over the years, Roger, and I hope you'll continue to help us in that respect. Now to something totally different. You spend half of your year in the United States. What would you say are the main differences between Dutch and American cultures, and what draws you to dwell in these two worlds?
Well, the Netherlands is small, very dense in all senses, lots of people, lots of activities, easy transport, or rather easy déplacement between locations, very convenient. The United States, of course, is quite the opposite. It's absolutely huge, with some very, very wild country, and indeed some very wild people. The fact that The Hague can access numerous different cultures makes it a highly colorful place, whereas, of course, in the United States, it's monolingual English, with the exception of the Southwest and all the Spanish, which is also exciting. Deserts, massive mountains, it's a wild man, it's an outdoor man's world. Whereas the Netherlands does not have, the Switzerlands and the deserts and the wildernesses that are so exciting, particularly in the United States. The American people, of course, are quite extraordinarily friendly and hospitable and generous, whereas the Dutch are a little bit more, hesitant before opening up to strangers. They are quick with an opinion, and generally, I've got to say, most of the time right. But for instance, an Englishman getting used to the Dutch way of expressing their opinions, it is fairly brutal. It takes the Brits quite a long time to separate directness from bad manners, and some people never quite get over the shock.
Now, I think the pandemic has dealt blows to to all continents across the world. What are you hoping will emerge after this time?
Well, I think COVID, I think an awful lot of people have discovered that the protesters do have a point. The central government, the medical services, and the so-called experts on transmissible diseases and this sort of thing have basically controlled social interaction over the past 2.5 years, with the consequence that a lot of people have been tediously and unpleasantly affected, being locked up and having to follow all sorts of rather irritating rules and regulations. Tough to be certain about how it will develop. I think everything will probably just gently return to a degree of normality. The humans within, across the world, will benefit from all of the natural defenses they've been able to build up, and I think within 12 months' time it will hopefully be simply past tense.
Should we hold on to any of the lessons learned?
Well, I think that yes. I mean, I'm not a medical man, but although I had a scientific upbringing, there are a lot of lessons that we can and have learned from this, and undoubtedly, the viral threat to humankind is fairly significant. So I'm just hoping that governments learn from each other and their own internal lessons and so forth, such that it becomes much more a standard problem which can be handled with standard responses, rather like the traditional vaccination of children against polio and measles and so forth, which has been immensely successful. No, I think we'll gently move back to the situation before COVID, but always with our antenna fully extended, checking out how things are in the real life or in the real world.
Now that the Netherlands has literally opens its door again to the public, what are the first events, museums, what are you going to do in the coming weeks?
Well, you said it. I'm not a music buff, and so I don't do great big outdoor shows. But musea and museums are absolutely spectacular here. They're all close by. They are not expensive to visit. You can buy a museum card, and that will keep you busy for months. The outdoors, of course, walking on the beach. The dogs will appreciate the freedom, methinks. Sport, of course, most people have been spending their time indoors watching television. Thank you, Roald Dahl. But one can understand why. The average household has dozens of Dutch television stations, but also access to vast numbers of foreign television stations. So the range of indoor entertainment is large. I think that bars for the sort of the under 50 age group will undoubtedly come back into their own. You know, the brown cafes in Amsterdam have been suffering undoubtedly in the last couple of years. And what shall I say? The no skating, sadly, this winter. But summertime, the great walks and journeys out in the Platteland will entertain an awful lot of folk.
On your bikes, folks.
There you go. And that is, of course, something, I mean, any Englishman, any foreigner who has done a reasonable amount of cycling in the Netherlands knows that it is just extraordinary where you can go and in what sort of safety on a bike. I love the way that the major organization serving the car driver, the ANWB, in Dutch is known as the Algemeen Nederlands Wielerbond, I think. And that is actually an organization that was originally dedicated to serving the cyclist. So bicycles have made an immense contribution. And I think you might even make the point that a few of those gold medals won in the cycling, in the skating arena at the Olympic Games were thanks to all that exercise that bicycles give to the athletes. The skating and cycling use similar muscle systems. So there you have it, you know, the cycling and the skating country. Brilliant.
I know you've watched the Winter Olympics and the Dutch performance with great pleasure this year, Roger.
Oh, indeed. Yes, absolutely. It is quite extraordinary how to explain, or rather trying to explain, why it is that the Dutch are so good on long distance skating. And you begin to realize, I remember the very first time I saw 400-meter ice skating, I thought, these guys aren't working. It's all in slow motion, and they come around that bend, you know, right up ahead of you, and they're almost moving through honey. But of course, it's not. Once you yourself can skate and have skated, let's say, a 50 or 100 kilometer trip, you realize that it's a fascinating sport that requires delicacy in the push-off to obtain maximum forward speed. And that is not learnt from one day to the other. The Dutch have been at it for hundreds of years, and it's paid off, It's got them a lot of PR.
Gold, silver, and bronze.
Yeah.
17, was it, in the end?
I think so, something like that. I don't know if we did it. Sochi, I think the Dutch earned at least 2, if not 3 clean sweeps, gold, silver, bronze. I don't know if we won any clean sweeps this time. The rest of the world is catching up. But it's always a delight to watch. And once you know how to skate, you know what to look for in a guy's or a girl's, technique. Hats off to the ladies, because I think that this year, the Netherlands ladies Olympic athletes won more medals than any other country in the world.
Roger Thurman, it's been a pleasure to hear your wonderful voice on DutchbuzZ and hear your opinions broad and wide. I do hope we can continue to make our jingles with you until kingdom come. Thank you, Roger.
Well done. Lovely to talk to you.
For DutchbuzZ, I'm Lilian Strobach.
DutchbuzZ, your weekly dose of inspiration from some of the city's special people.